not everyone who loses access to you is losing something they valued. Some are just losing control. And when you stop reacting, they panic. Not because you're gone, but because now they have to face themselves.
Have you ever entered a room and felt the energy shift before you even speak? It's because the strongest presence often isn't loud. Jung believed our energy speaks volumes long before our lips do. When you hold your center and refuse to respond impulsively, you send a signal. You're no longer available. People rely on your reactions. They feed from your emotional patterns. Because in that predictability, there is control. But when you break the pattern, when you choose silence over reaction, you unravel the script, and suddenly, they realize they never knew you at all. That withdrawal isn't weakness, it's sovereignty. Silence becomes a mirror. They start questioning, chasing, feeling. And the power shifts not in your words, but in your stillness. This video isn't about abandoning people. It's about choosing yourself. It's about reclaiming emotional presence by deciding where your energy goes. Tensions and provoked triggers, they're not just annoyances, they're messages. Jung saw irritations as projections. When someone pushes your buttons, it's seldom about them. It's about what you've left unresolved inside yourself. If someone tries to provoke you into reacting, ask, what are they triggering within me? Because the more available you are emotionally, the more you become a target for manipulation. Being always present for everyone costs you presence with yourself. To shift the dynamic, stop giving yourself away. Say, not now. Be unavailable. And watch how the world becomes unsettled, not by what you do, but by what you don't give. That unsettled space forces clarity, because suddenly, people see themselves in you, in your silence, your clarity.
You've been trained to say yes, to be helpful, to respond immediately. But Jung warned that your persona, built for acceptance, often betrays your soul. When you overextend yourself to please, you erase your own boundaries. Every automatic reply, every emotional reflex costs psychic energy, and energy is finite. When you spend it to save the day for others, you lose yourself. You start fading, becoming emotionally predictable, and therefore expendable. Being relevant isn't about presence, it's about intention. When you cultivate sacred unavailability, people begin to value your words, not expect them. Your energy becomes precious because it's not on tap. This isn't selfishness, it's sovereignty. It's a declaration. My presence is not a default. I choose it. And this shift changes how the world treats you. Do you ever rehash conversations in your mind? Respond to imagined criticisms? Replay how you could have been sharper, nicer, stronger? Jung said that every thought, every emotion, consumes psychic energy, and impulsive responses burn through it without nourishment. When you react from the wound, not the center, you feed chaos. You respond to triggers that don't deserve you. Emotional vampires thrive on that. Your reaction becomes their fuel, not your truth. Instead, watch. Pause. Ask, is this worth my energy? Because healing begins when you stop handing out pieces of your soul to deserve love, to avoid conflict, to maintain an image. Your energy isn't a utility bill, it's a currency. Only invest it where the return aligns with your values, not someone else's.
Most people think silence means surrender, withdrawal, powerlessness. But Jung saw silence as depth. When you don't jump into every conversation, emotion, or drama, your presence becomes magnetic, even without a word. You don't need to explain yourself. You don't need to justify your boundaries. Your silence does that. In that stillness, people project their curiosities back onto you. and you reshape the dynamic. Conscious silence disrupts habitual emotional control. It's the ultimate boundary, unspoken but firm. People who relied on your availability now have nothing to pull, and they're forced to confront their own emptiness. Silence redefines presence. It says, "I am here, but on my terms." You were conditioned to always respond, to fix, to comfort, to explain. Jung warned that such over-availability makes you predictable and manipulatable. But when you pause, when you withhold your reaction, everything shifts. Suddenly, people lose the emotional script and scramble for your energy. This isn't rejection, it's sovereignty. You're not punishing others, you're reclaiming yourself. Withdrawing isn't coldness, it's disruption. The game changes because your absence becomes a force. Keep your center. Let others chase your emotional availability, not because you're mean, but because you're choosing where your life belongs. This shift reveals two truths: the emotional stability of others and your own inner power.
Whenever you react to manipulation, an emotional trigger, a guilt trip, a provocation, that energy goes out. Jung considered psychic energy a limited currency, and draining it means losing your capacity to hold your own space. When you respond, you're feeding not just the situation, but the identity others built for you. The needy partner, the gaslighting friend, the relentless asker, they rely on that reaction. But once you stop feeding it, the pattern collapses. Most people don't get exhausted because they work too hard. They get exhausted because they give too much of themselves. Emotional sovereignty starts when you decide your energy is not freely available. That energy shift doesn't go unnoticed. You become less of a tool and more of a subject again, someone with boundaries, presence, and demand for mutual respect. From the start, you learn that being nice, peacekeeping, and always responsive is your ticket to inclusion. Jung called that the persona, a mask adopted for the world. But masks age, contracts expire. When you stop saying yes out of obligation, when you pause before responding, people realize you're no longer who they thought you were, and that scares them. Breaking that mask doesn't shatter their world, it liberates yours. Your silence, your boundary, your stillness dismantles the role they cast for you. And once you're freed from that persona, from the obligation to please, your presence becomes invitation rather than performance.
People often project their own insecurities onto you, about control, attention, validation. Jung taught that projection is a psychological defense. We blame others for what lives unsolved inside us. But projections need fuel, your reaction, to stay alive. When you withdraw, silence becomes the buffer. The mirror cracks. Those who tried to provoke, accuse, or manipulate will expose themselves because they can no longer hide behind your emotional responses. Your unavailability doesn't deflect projection, it dissolves it. And that clarity, the reflection of their own mechanics, becomes more powerful than any argument. Retreat implies fear. Retreat implies backing away. But Jungian silence, rooted in awareness, is rebellion. It challenges the emotional economy that's built on your reaction. When you refuse to explain, justify, or defend, especially to those who demand emotional availability, you redirect the power dynamic. You're not running from life, you're stepping into higher ground. You're choosing quality over quantity in emotional exchange, sovereignty over default presence. That kind of silence isn't reactive, it's creative. It doesn't signal withdrawal, it signals direction. This is who I will be, not what you tell me to be.
Silence isn't absence, it's authority. Jung taught that individuation, the journey to your true self, demands moments of withdrawal, not to hide, but to listen. When you stop responding instantly, you open space for deep introspection, clarity, and recalibration. That void of response unsettles people used to having access to your energy. They search, they argue, they feel the shift. Suddenly, they realize they no longer hold the keys to your presence. And that's where your power lies. Your silence doesn't need justification. It emanates value. It tells others, I choose when I show up, and I choose to protect my center. And in that decision rests sovereignty. Peace built not from obedience, but from conscious choice. You exchange psychic energy with every reaction you make. Jung understood the psyche as an economy, drained by impulsive responses, built by measured presence. Mastery isn't control over others, it's discipline over yourself. When you resist the urge to plead, explain, or argue, that energy returns home. Home to your core. Home to your power. You become the curator of your inner experience rather than a pawn in someone else's emotional game. Emotional mastery is not about numbing yourself. It's about being thoughtful, observing your impulses before acting on them, and recognizing when others try to hijack your attention. Because energy spent without a return is not connection, it's depletion. Protect what you give, and the world will learn to respect it. People don't respect what they don't need to earn. When your availability becomes default, your presence becomes invisible. Jung taught that the persona built for validation often sacrifices value. You're always there, so they stop noticing you. But when you choose to step back, even a little, that space becomes meaningful. The silence itself becomes magnetic. Suddenly, people realize they miss more than your words. They miss your intention, your essence, your truth. This is not about ego. It's about presence rooted in value, not convenience. You reclaim your worth not by shouting, but by standing still. And in that stillness, people wake up to your presence again, not as an entitlement, but as a choice they must truly earn. When someone triggers you, your ego demands instant defense. Jung warned that the ego lives for approval and control and often reacts prematurely. Wisdom, however, speaks softly, after reflection. When you pause, you let alignment triumph over reaction. Let silence sit. Let the urge to correct, explain, or justify fade. Your power isn't in proving you're right. It's in proving you're unshakable. In choosing equilibrium over validation. This doesn't make you passive. It makes you grounded. Others are spinning in chaos. You're centered in calm. And from that calm, real influence emerges. Reactivity dissolves sovereignty. Patience builds it, and wisdom waits in the quiet. Withdrawal isn't surrender. It's strategic. Jung called this sacred isolation, a time to regroup, rebuild, and reinvent. When you withdraw consciously, you create fertile ground, space where clarity, healing, and transformation can seed themselves. Your absence disrupts old dynamics so new ones can emerge. It gives you the distance needed to see your patterns without distortion, to understand your impulses, triggers, and projections. Recalibration isn't about retreating from life. It's about returning to who you were meant to be. Not molded by others, but shaped by your own values. And when you reemerge, after rest, reflection, rebuilding, you come back not as someone who reacted, but as someone who evolves. You've spent years escaping pain, conflict, your own instincts. Jung taught that healing begins when you stop, when you confront what you've been avoiding, when you stay in the hurt, not to stay broken, but to become whole. That act of stillness isn't surrender. It's a confrontation with your truth. At first, it's trembling silence. Then, a new voice emerges. You face the empty space where connection once was and find clarity in the discomfort. People may resent your change. They may feel abandoned or threatened. That's not a failure. It's a reflection of their dependency on your old version. Your transformation disturbs their story. But what you're birthing is not for their approval. It's for your awakening. So stop running, sit, feel, integrate. Healed isn't an escape. Healed is an arrival.
Pausing isn't withdrawal, it's alignment. Jung showed that true peace comes from reconciling with your inner shadow, not pretending it's not there. When your decisions come from presence, not reflex, they reflect harmony, not conflict. Each boundary you set isn't rejection, it's a declaration. I choose me. When you stop reacting to emotional drama, you create space for calm judgment and unwavering clarity. Silence isn't a burden, it's a sanctuary, a quiet terrain where you rebuild not from fear, but from purpose, where your energy returns, where your intuition deepens. Peace isn't external, it's internal alignment with your own center. And once you find it, you walk differently, even if no one hears the shift. Strength doesn't shout, it absorbs. Jung admired those who carried silence as power. When you don't respond to provocation, you refuse to be emotional fuel. You refine your presence by not wearing it thin. Your energy becomes authority. You enter a room and without speaking, people feel your shift. It's not intimidation, it's rooted calm. Boundaries rooted in identity, not reaction. That level of presence comes from integrating the shadow, the unspoken grief, the hidden rage, the rejected flaws, until they become parts of strength, not sources of shame. You used to react because you didn't value your peace. Now you hold stillness as your core. That form of power is unforgettable and unassailable.
Every time you respond when you shouldn't, you scatter vital energy. Jung called this psychic energy, finite, non-renewable, sacred. Your emotional labor is not infinite, it's a resource. Guard it wisely. Say no without guilt. Withdraw without apology. Protect the inner space where your true self lives, because that space is too rare to pollute. Self-abandonment is asking too much of yourself for people who never meant to care. Sovereignty is deciding where you invest and when you don't. When you stop giving your energy as default, it becomes magnetic. It's no longer expected, it becomes valued. And that value is your essence reclaiming territory. You don't reach individuation by conquering shadows. You reach it by integration, by welcoming your whole self. Jung's vision wasn't perfection, It was wholeness. At the end of this journey, you don't become someone new, you rediscover what was buried. You reunite with your parts, your pain, your rage, your grief, and your depth. And you become a whole field of being. From that field, your presence no longer belongs to others, it belongs to you. Emotional sovereignty is not defiance, it's reclamation. It's democracy inside your mind and body. You rule your energy, not surrender it. Your arrival isn't announced, it's felt, resonated, honored. And every silence that once felt heavy now hums with power.